Freud was also very much convinced that the mind was a composite of contradictory drives. This is a very interesting proposition, and I think one that's true. I think you can see it most particularly if you consider the behavior of 2-year-olds, and as I've already discussed with you, if you watch a 2-year-old, they rapidly cycle from one intensely motivated state to another. And I think a reasonable way of conceptualizing that is that much of the underlying biology of the 2-year-old is already in place in terms of his or her fundamental motivations. A 2-year-old can be hungry, and a 2-year-old can be hot or cold or uncomfortable in a variety of different ways, or feel pain, or feel anxiety, or feel joy, or feel exhilaration, or curiosity, or surprise. All that circuitry is there, but it's not integrated at a higher level into a functioning personality, because in part what the functioning personality is a collective agreement among all those fundamental drives as to which is going to take priority when and under what conditions, and the integration of that with the entire broader cultural milieu. So for example, by the time your 2-year-old is 4, you would expect them to be able to self-regulate, which means when they step into a particular circumstance, they should be able to determine which of their motivational states is going to be allowed to manifest itself. We would think about that as a form of learned inhibition, even though it's really not. It's more like the integration of those motivated states into a higher order game where each of them gets a chance to express themselves, but only in a particular order and only under particular circumstances. And then, of course, the 4-year-old has to have learned to do that in the presence of other children and in the presence of other adults, so that the fundamental motivational structures are integrated into a higher order structure that allows everybody to get along just fine and for everyone to pursue the things that they need to pursue. And so, part of the reason you might think that you have a cortex is so that you can take the more fundamental elements of your drives, which you could think of as part of the Freudian id, which means it. It's the thing that in you isn't you. It's the things that you're subject to from within. The reason that you have a cortex in many ways is so that you can figure out how to integrate those complex states of being that keep you alive in some fundamental sense into a society that's characterized by hundreds or thousands of other creatures trying to do the same thing at the same time. And so you can imagine that that requires particular adaptation to the particulars of the society and the more general functions of the deep id. So the unconscious is partly the id, which is this collection of drives. Freud concentrated mostly on the sexual drives and the aggressive drives, because those are, or instincts, the sexual instincts and the aggressive instincts. It's a better term than drive, because those are the most difficult to integrate into the surrounding social milieu. Because sex, for example, is a pretty selfish act. It isn't an altruistic act in any sense. And in some sense, it's also a zero-sum game. You're in competition with everyone else for your success at that particular game. You can say the same thing about aggression, especially if you think about it in relationship to dominance hierarchy striving, because there are very few positions in any given dominance hierarchy that are at the top. And so in some ways, the competition is zero-sum, and it's every person against every other person. But while that's happening, you have to keep the dominance hierarchy itself in place, right? Because there's no sense in destroying the structure that you're trying to climb. And so Freud points out constantly that this is a very, very difficult process of integration. He also points out that in some sense, the way that people solve that problem is not by integrating. What they do instead is repress. Now, repression has two elements. One might be, and this is maybe more what's dealt with by cognitive behavioral psychologists, one form of repression is you just don't develop the capacity. So let's say, if you're a sophisticated child and you're a fairly aggressive child, then what you learn to do is to integrate your aggression into the games that you play with other people. So maybe you turn into a very competitive and skilled child. And that doesn't mean precisely that you've inhibited your aggression. It means that you've developed it into an unbelievably sophisticated set of skills so that you can manifest it within the games that people play without blowing the games apart. So you can be a competitive and skilled player, basketball player, for example, which can be extremely aggressive, or a hockey player, or something like that. But everyone still wants to play with you. So that means that there's been no repression of the aggressive drive, or limited. It's just been integrated into all the things that it can conceivably inform. The alternative to that would be, well, let's say your parents said, you're never to be angry with anyone under any circumstances whatsoever, because good people never get mad. Now, lots of people believe that. Identifying aggression with evil, certainly, or at least with the kind of actions that only people they despise engage in, which generally means that their capacity for aggression is still there in a very nascent and underdeveloped form, but that they have absolutely no skills whatsoever that would be useful for integrating it into their lives. So, for example, one manifestation of the integration of aggression is, let's say that you're negotiating for a job. It's an aggressive negotiation because they want you cheap and you don't want to be taken cheaply. So if you're good at drawing on your aggressive ability, the first thing that you figure out is, well, how is it that I can say no in this negotiation and mean it, which is an aggressive act. If you want something from me and I just say no, then at minimum I'm putting up a wall that you don't get to cross. And if you're negotiating with someone and you can't do that, you lose. And then people walk all over you. And then what's going to happen to your aggression is it's going to manifest itself in resentment, which is, a very unproductive form of aggression. And then according to Freud, and I think this is a very accurate observation, that resentment is going to drive leakages of aggressive behavior everywhere. So you'll come home from the negotiation where you didn't get the salary that you deserved, and your husband or your wife will say some little niggling thing that's, under most circumstances,